I walked down the aisle with a split lip while my groom laughed. At the altar, he handed me a pen to sign away. My father's $50 million company. I snapped it in half and reached into my bouquet. 300 guests filled the cathedral, and not one of them looked directly at my face. That's the thing about power and money in the same room. People learn very quickly which direction is safe to look. Senators, investors, the kind of socialites whose names appear on hospital wings and university endowments. They all found somewhere else to rest their eyes as I walked past. At the stained glass, at their programs, at the lilies banked along the aisle in perfect white columns. Anywhere but the bruise spreading along my left cheekbone or the split in my lower lip that my makeup artist, her hands shaking, tears streaming silently down her own face, had done her best with 90 minutes earlier. The organ played something by Bach. I walked at the pace I'd rehearsed. Caleb Whitmore stood at the altar in a custom black tuxedo, watching me come toward him the way a king watches tribute arrive. Patient, proprietorial, already bored by the ceremony of it. He was 38, dark-haired, the kind of handsome that photographs well and exhausts you in person, and he had the absolute, unshakable confidence of a man who had never, in his entire life, encountered a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. As I reached the altar steps, he leaned toward his nearest groomsman, not even bothering to lower his voice properly, because why would he? This was still his room, and said, "She needed a reminder of who's boss before we sign the papers." Laughter rippled through the front rows. Easy, delighted laughter. The laughter of people who'd been in rooms like this their whole lives and understood instinctively that cruelty from the right person in the right tuxedo was just another form of charm. His mother, Evelyn Whitmore, sat in the front pew in raw ivory silk, pressing lace-gloved fingers to her lips, eyes shining with what looked from a distance like maternal joy. I know what it actually was. I'd watched it up close for 8 months. Caleb took my hand and drew me up the final step to stand beside him. His grip was exactly as hard as it needed to be to make a point through a silk glove, and no harder. He'd always been precise about things like that. He pressed a gold pen into my palm, heavy, monogrammed, the kind of pen you buy when you want someone to feel the weight of what they're signing. "Registry first, sweetheart," he said quietly, tilting his head toward the small table beside the pastor's podium. "Let's make it official before God." The pen touched the paper. I looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then I snapped it in half. The crack was louder than I expected, sharp and clean, like a branch giving way, and the silence that followed was the first genuine silence the room had produced all morning. Caleb's smile didn't disappear. It just froze, set, like something cooling into a permanent shape. "I prefer," I said, "to write my own endings." I reached into my bouquet. White peonies, his mother's choice. Everything in this wedding had been his mother's choice. And I pulled out a silver flash drive, and I watched Caleb Whitmore's face go the color of old ash. "My name is Elena Voss. I'm 31 years old, and for the last 4 years, I've been the CEO of Vailtech, a technology company my father, Dr. Heinrich Voss, built over 27 years from a research lab in his garage in Palo Alto into a $50 million enterprise that holds 41 active patents in enterprise infrastructure software, with government contracts on 3 continents. My father died 18 months ago, pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in October, gone by February, the kind of timeline that doesn't leave room for proper goodbyes, only for urgent conversations about what matters most. The last real conversation we had in the hospital, he held my hand and said, 'The company is yours, Lena, not because you're my daughter, because you're the only person I trust to run it the way it deserves to be run. Promise me you'll read everything before you sign anything. When men rush you to sign, it's because they're terrified of what you'll find if you read it first.' I promised him. I've thought about that promise almost every day since. The Whitmores entered my life 6 months after my father's funeral. At a charity gala I almost didn't attend. I'd been buried in quarterly reports, still learning the full scope of what I'd inherited, still sleeping 4 hours a night and running on grief and bad coffee. Caleb was introduced to me by a mutual investor friend, and he was, I'll admit, everything he appeared to be in that first meeting. Charming, attentive, knowledgeable enough about the tech sector to hold a real conversation, and utterly, completely interested in me as a person. I told myself afterward that the interest was real. The first red flag was small enough to explain away. 3 months into dating, Caleb mentioned, almost in passing, over dinner, that his family's investment firm, Whitmore Capital, had always admired Vailtech, and that he thought there might be natural synergies in combining resources eventually. I filed it under, of course. He's a businessman, he thinks about these things, and moved on. The second flag was a little harder to explain. 6 months in, Evelyn, who had by then become a fixture at Sunday lunches and holiday dinners, always immaculately dressed, always precise in her warmth, asked me, in what felt like genuine curiosity, whether I found the CEO role a lot to carry alone. I said I had a good team. She said, "Of course, but a company like your father's deserves to be in the right hands long term. Have you thought about what that looks like?" I said it looked like mine. She smiled and changed the subject. The third flag was the one I should have acted on immediately. I didn't. 8 months ago, 4 months before the engagement, I came back from a product summit in Singapore to find, buried in a chain of forwarded emails that my assistant Priya had flagged as FYI, not urgent, a meeting request between Whitmore Capital's legal team and 3 members of my own board of directors. The subject line was, Vailtech Strategic Alignment, Preliminary Discussion. There was no agenda attached. There was no explanation for why Whitmore Capital's lawyers were meeting with my board members without my knowledge, and there was no version of that sentence that didn't make my stomach drop the moment I read it. I told myself, standing in my kitchen at 11 p.m. with jet lag and a cup of cold coffee, there's a reasonable explanation. Caleb's firm has clients who overlap with ours. Board members take calls. This could be nothing. I called my COO, James Firth, the next morning. James had been with my father since year 8 of the company and had a face like a good poker player. Impossible to read unless he wanted you to. He said he'd heard about the meeting secondhand through another board member and had assumed I'd been told. I wasn't told, I said. James was quiet for a moment. Elena, he said carefully, how much do you actually know about Whitmore Capital's current portfolio position? I didn't know enough. I found out more over the next 2 days, working through a contact at a financial research firm, a woman named Sandra Osei, CFA, who'd been quietly tracking private equity activity in the mid-market tech sector for 11 years. And what Sandra showed me, over a very long phone call, made my hands do the thing they do when something is actually wrong. Go completely still, as though my body understood before my brain did that motion would be the wrong response here. Whitmore Capital had been quietly acquiring minority positions in companies adjacent to Vailtech, suppliers, integration partners, a smaller competitor, over the past 14 months. Individually, each position was small enough not to trigger disclosure requirements. Together, according to Sandra's analysis, they formed a fairly clear consolidation play, and the missing piece, the one that would make the whole structure work, was a controlling interest in Vailtech itself. If someone held Vailtech's board voting rights, Sandra said, combined with these other positions, they'd control a significant portion of the enterprise infrastructure market in the Pacific region. That's a 9-figure play, minimum. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I called Caleb and told him I'd been thinking, and that yes, I thought this spring might be a beautiful time for a wedding. I'd already started planning something else entirely. The engagement was announced in January. By February, I had, through a private investigations firm called Meridian Group, run by a former FBI financial crimes analyst named Robert Carey, who Nia Patel, my late father's corporate counsel, had used on 3 separate occasions and trusted absolutely. A fairly complete picture of what the Whitmores were actually planning. The document they intended me to sign before the wedding wasn't a prenuptial agreement. It was, as Robert described it in his report, a comprehensive asset transfer instrument, structured to appear like standard estate planning. Inside it, my shares in Vailtech transferred into a trust. The board voting rights attached to those shares transferred with them. My grandmother's estate, a property in Bavaria that my father had inherited and I had technically owned since his death, listed as collateral. Everything that made me the CEO of anything, signed into a structure I did not control and could not exit without Whitmore Capital's consent. This isn't a prenup, Nia said when I showed it to her. She'd been my father's lawyer for 19 years and mine for 18 months, and she said it the way she said most things, precisely, without decoration. This is a corporate acquisition dressed up as a marriage contract. If you'd signed this, you would have walked out of that wedding as Caleb Whitmore's wife and woken up the next morning as Vailtech's former CEO. I know, I said. When did they give it to you? They haven't yet. I found it in Caleb's home office. I photographed every page. Nia looked at me for a moment over her reading glasses. You went through his office? I went through his office. She almost smiled. She has a very specific almost smile that she reserves for moments when she's genuinely pleased but doesn't want to encourage recklessness. Good, she said. Now let's talk about what we're going to do about it and how long we have. We had 4 months. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in June. The Vailtech board vote on a proposed merger, conveniently timed for the morning of the wedding, presumably to be decided while I was otherwise occupied by the 3 board members who were, as Robert Carey's report outlined in 42 pages, receiving undisclosed payments from Whitmore Capital, was scheduled for 10 a.m. We had 4 months to build something airtight, to document every payment, every email, every phone call, to build a case that couldn't be disputed the morning after a wedding. I wasn't going to let be a wedding. I kept the engagement ring on my finger. I kept going to Sunday lunches. I kept smiling at Evelyn Whitmore across tables and letting her redirect conversations about company governance to conversations about centerpieces, because every week she thought I was manageable was another week I had to gather what I needed. My father had always said the most useful thing you can be, in any negotiation, is underestimated. I had been underestimated my entire adult life. I was exceptionally good at it by now. 4 weeks before the wedding, I hired a security systems technician named Paul Reyes, bonded, licensed, 16 years in private residential security, to install a concealed camera in the bridal suite of the cathedral. The suite would be used the morning of the wedding for final preparations, and Nia had said quietly weeks earlier, if they're going to pressure you to sign, they'll do it that morning. No witnesses, time pressure, somewhere private. Be ready for that. I was ready. Paul installed the camera at 4 a.m. On the Monday before the wedding, a lens no larger than a thumbnail, embedded in the decorative molding above the vanity mirror, feeding a continuous encrypted stream to a receiver in my car, parked 2 blocks away, monitored by Robert Carey's team. Paul ran a test feed from my phone, crystal clear. The angle covered the entire room. The morning of the wedding, exactly as Nia had predicted, Evelyn arrived at the bridal suite at 7:45, while my makeup artist was still working. She waited until the makeup artist stepped out for supplies, a pause that, in retrospect, had almost certainly been manufactured, and then she sat down across from me at the vanity and placed the document on the marble surface between us. us. It's just a formality, she said. Her voice was warm, the way a blade can look warm if the light hits it right. Caleb wants the legal matter settled before the ceremony. You understand? Of course, I said. You'll want to review it. I've already reviewed it, I said pleasantly. I found it in Caleb's desk in February. I've had 4 months. The warmth in her face cooled by exactly the amount she allowed it to, and no more. She was very good. I'll give her that. Sign it, Elena, she said. Or the photographs go to the press tonight. The affair, the emails. We have enough to remove you from the board before Monday's vote, and once you're out, there's nothing to come back to. I looked at her across the marble vanity in the light of the bridal suite mirror. Photographs of an affair I didn't have, I said. Fabricated, yes. She said it without even blinking. Convincingly so. The emails were quite good. Our tech team is thorough. By the time the truth comes out, if it ever does, the board vote will be done and the merger will be filed. I nodded slowly. And if I don't sign? Evelyn smiled. Then my son will remind you that this decision has consequences. 20 minutes later, Caleb did exactly that. He came into the suite alone, closed the door behind him, and when I told him I wasn't signing anything, he drew his hand back and hit me hard across the left side of my face. Not a slap, a backhand, deliberate, the ring on his right hand catching my cheekbone at the edge of the contact. My lips split against my own teeth. I stood there for a moment, tasting blood, while Caleb straightened his tuxedo jacket. Sign the document, Elena, he said, calm, already composed. Or this is just the beginning. I wiped my mouth. I looked at him, and I did the one thing he didn't expect. I said nothing. I picked up the pen he'd left on the vanity. I walked to the door. I called my makeup artist back in. 20 minutes later, I was walking down the aisle, with a flash drive in my bouquet, my blood on his cufflink, and Robert Carey watching a live feed from a parking garage 2 blocks away. When the pen snapped in my hands, the sound cracked through 300 guests like a starting gun. Caleb's frozen smile was the most honest thing I'd ever seen on his face. Beneath it, for just a fraction of a second before the control reasserted itself, was something I recognized from the bridal suite, the look of a man recalculating. I didn't give him time to finish calculating. I walked to the pastor's podium. The pastor himself, a kind, elderly man named Reverend Okafor, who had married my parents 34 years earlier, and had 2 nights before been quietly briefed by Naya on what was coming, and who had agreed, with what I can only describe as quiet, righteous calm, to step aside. And I jammed the flash drive into the projector port in the podium's media panel. The 20-foot projection screen behind the altar blazed to life. The camera above the bridal suite vanity had excellent resolution. The timestamp in the corner read 7:52 a.m., an hour and 3 minutes before the ceremony began. Evelyn was visible at the vanity, leaning forward, pushing the document across the marble surface. My son is not marrying a useless, weeping heiress with legal opinions, Evelyn's voice said through the cathedral speakers, in exactly the clipped, precise tone I'd heard across dozens of Sunday lunches. We need the voting rights transferred and filed by 10 o'clock. Sign it or the photographs go out tonight. 300 people made a sound like a held breath, all released at once. Then Caleb appeared on screen. The camera had caught him perfectly. The tuxedo, the door closing behind him, the deliberate stillness before he spoke. You don't even understand what your father built, on-screen Caleb said. You inherited power by pure accident. Sign it, Elena, or this is just the beginning. The hand drew back. The contact landed. The sound, captured perfectly by the camera's microphone, hit the cathedral speakers with a clarity that made several women in the front rows flinch backward. Screams. Actual screams, not gasps. A senator's wife covered her mouth. 2 of Caleb's groomsmen looked at each other with the specific expression of people wondering how fast they could exit without drawing attention. The real Caleb, the one standing 3 feet from me at the altar, lunged for the projector cord. He moved fast. He'd clearly had some plan for this, some contingency. He didn't get there. My security detail, 2 former Metropolitan Police officers named Davies and Park, who had been positioned as ushers since 7 that morning, as Nia's idea and one of her better ones, stepped forward simultaneously and stopped him. Cold, efficient, no drama. Caleb dropped to his knees, not because anyone made him. Voluntarily, in front of 300 cameras that were now all pointed at him, his face recomposing in real time into something that looked, almost impressively, like devastation. It's a deep fake, he said, his voice breaking on cue. She's been struggling, mentally. She's been having episodes. I would never... His voice cracked completely. He pressed a hand to his face. I love this woman. I would never hurt her. And here's the thing. Here is the genuinely terrifying thing that I'd been warned about and had still, in the room, in real time, felt like swallowing ice. It almost worked. I watched the room waver. I watched 300 people who'd just seen and heard a video of this man strike me, start to look at each other with a new uncertainty. His performance was perfect. The tears were real, or real enough. And he was right about one thing. The instinct in those rooms, in rooms like that with men like that, is still to reach for the version of the story where the crying man is the victim. He rose from his knees, his arms opened. He walked toward me across the altar steps, and his voice dropped to something barely audible, meant only for me, which told me everything about how certain he still was. I win, he said. They'll always believe the man. I looked at him. I let him get close enough to be completely sure I was beaten. Then I stepped to the microphone. Deepfakes are convincing, I said, and my voice was steady. Steadier than I expected. Steadier than I had any real right to be. I'll grant you that. But they have one fatal fatal flaw. I turned and looked toward the back of the cathedral. They don't leave DNA. Detective Adrian Harris had been with the Metropolitan Police Financial Crimes Unit for 19 years before transferring, 6 years ago, to a specialized joint task force focused on corporate fraud and coercive financial crimes. He was 61, compact, with the expression of a man who'd heard every possible version of every possible story and had stopped being surprised by any of them around 2009. He walked forward from the side aisle now, unhurried, pulling on a pair of nitrile gloves with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. "Extend your right arm, Mr. Whitmore," he said. Caleb went still. Not the performed stillness from earlier. Genuine, physiological stillness. The kind that happens when a body realizes something before the mind catches up. Davies and Park stepped in simultaneously. Caleb's right arm came forward. Detective Harris reached for the tuxedo sleeve and pushed it back, exposing the monogrammed cufflink. Custom gold, the Whitmore family crest. Exactly the kind of cufflink that costs enough to feel like a statement. There, caught in the setting where the face of the cufflink met the post, was a smear of crimson. Small, precise, completely, absolutely real. My blood. Caleb had cleaned his hands after the bridal suite. He hadn't thought about the cufflink. People who hurt people in a hurry rarely think about the cufflinks. Harris bagged it with the quiet efficiency of someone whose job is making sure small things survive to matter later. The cathedral doors opened. Not dramatically, just opened, the way large wooden doors open when people pull them. But then the people came through, and they came fast. And the suits they wore had 2 letters on them that are, in my experience, the most clarifying 2 letters a room full of people expecting a wedding can possibly see. Naya Patel was with them, walking at the speed of someone who's been waiting all morning to walk exactly this way. 44 years old, my father's corporate counsel and now mine, wearing a charcoal blazer and carrying a leather briefcase that I happened to know contained, among other things, 47 pages of forensic accounting documentation, 18 months of subpoenaed email records, and a formal SEC filing that had gone live at 9:55 that morning. She stopped at the altar steps. She looked at Caleb Whitmore the way you'd look at a problem you'd already solved, and the look had something almost like relief in it. "I believe you remember me," she said, "from the encrypted emails you attempted to delete from your firm's server at 3:07 a.m. last Tuesday." She turned to Evelyn, in the front pew in her ivory silk. "The Whitmore Capital accounts are frozen by SEC emergency order, effective this morning. The diamonds you're wearing were purchased using funds currently under federal review." She extended her hand. "Please remove them." Evelyn's fingers, still in the lace gloves, still perfectly composed until this exact second, trembled as she reached up and unclasped her necklace. She dropped it into Nia's palm without looking up. Caleb lurched forward past Davies and Park. Not toward me this time, but toward the 5 board members seated in the 2nd and 3rd pews. His last play, I realized. His absolute last card. "The board meeting started at 10, he shouted. "My people are voting right now. The merger resolution? You can't stop it. It's in session. You still lose the company." I looked at the board members. "Check your phones," I said. All 5 pulled them out simultaneously, the way people do when someone with authority asks them to do something specific and fast. Robert Carey's forensic accounting report, 42 pages, naming the 3 compromised board members by name, documenting the payments from Whitmore Capital, and formally recommending their immediate suspension pending investigation, had gone live on Vailtech's secure board portal at 9:55 a.m. Company counsel, per the emergency protocol Nia and I had filed 3 days earlier, had suspended the 3 affected board members' voting rights automatically upon publication, leaving the remaining board without quorum to proceed on the merger resolution. The merger vote was suspended. The resolution was invalid. It would be formally terminated, Nia told me later that afternoon, within 48 hours. I watched Caleb absorb this. I watched it move through him, through the charm, through the performance, through every layer of the man who had walked into that cathedral certain that the ending of this story belonged to him. "You used me," he said. His voice had gone flat, empty, all the performance finally used up. I stepped toward him, close enough to say the next part quietly, not to deny him an audience, but because some things are more powerful at low volume. "I started planning this the week your mother threatened my housekeeper for parking in the wrong spot," I said. "I kept going when your assistant made Priya cry in the parking garage for asking a scheduling question. I stayed engaged after I found the document in your desk, because by then I understood exactly what I was dealing with, and I needed time to build something that couldn't be dismantled." I held his gaze for a moment. "The engagement was your trap. The wedding was mine." I dropped my torn veil onto the altar table beside the broken gold pen. "The ending is mine." Detective Harris stepped forward. Federal agents moved in from both sides of the aisle. Caleb was guided, firmly, efficiently, with the kind of professionalism that doesn't require force when force has already been made unnecessary, toward the cathedral doors. Evelyn followed, escorted, her lace gloves folded in her lap, her ivory silk immaculate, her diamonds in Nia's briefcase. They walked down the velvet aisle, the exact path that had been laid for my wedding procession. Every white petal, every candle, every lily from the florist I'd been told I had to use, while 300 guests watched with phones raised and mouths open and no laughter whatsoever. The sound system was still on. I reached over and switched it off. The cathedral went quiet. Caleb was charged with assault causing grievous bodily harm, coercive control, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. His arraignment was 3 weeks after the the wedding that wasn't. He wore a suit to it that, according to Priya, who attended because she'd earned the right, was significantly less well-fitted than the tuxedo. Evelyn was charged separately: conspiracy, securities manipulation, and, on the basis of the bridal suite recording, criminal intimidation. Her lawyer entered a not guilty plea in a voice that Priya described as slightly less confident than I'd expected, given everything. 3 board members resigned before Nia even formally moved to have them removed. The 4th stayed and cooperated with the SEC. The 5th had never been compromised and called me personally, the afternoon of the wedding, to say 2 things: that he was sorry he hadn't seen it sooner, and that he intended to vote against the merger, now formally dead, just so the record would show it. I told him the record already showed enough. Robert Carey's report became, in Nia's words, a model of forensic documentation that she intended to reference in future cases. She said this in the way Nia says things she's proud of, flatly, just stating it, with no decoration, and I accepted it in the same way. Sandra Osei, the financial analyst who'd first shown me the Whitmore portfolio consolidation play, published a paper 6 months later on coercive acquisition strategies in mid-market tech. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. The case had been public for months by then. Vail Tech had its best quarter in 6 years the July after the wedding. I presented the results to the board in person, at a table where every seat was filled by someone who'd earned it, and nobody tried to take the pen out of my hand when it was time to sign. My father's company is still my father's company, and mine.